August 7, 1990. 5 days after Iraq invaded Kuwait, Ahmed al-Fahad is hiding in the basement of his house in Kuwait City. Upstairs, Iraqi soldiers are searching homes, looking for Kuwaiti military officers and government officials. Ahmed is neither. He's a 32-year-old engineer, but he's already decided that he's not going to accept Iraqi occupation. He's going to fight back. Within a week, he'll join hundreds of other Kuwaitis, forming an underground resistance movement that will operate for the next 6 months under Iraqi occupation. Welcome back to Gulf War Chronicles. Today we're talking about something that rarely gets mentioned when people discuss Desert Storm, the Kuwaiti resistance. While the world watched the air campaign and the 100-hour ground war, thousands of Kuwaiti civilians were fighting their own war inside occupied Kuwait. They gathered intelligence, sabotaged Iraqi operations, protected refugees, assassinated collaborators, and risked execution every single day. This is their story. Let's set the stage. On August 2, 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait with overwhelming force. The Kuwaiti military, small and unprepared, was defeated in less than 12 hours. The government fled to Saudi Arabia. Within 2 days, Iraq controlled the entire country. Saddam Hussein declared Kuwait the 19th province of Iraq and began systematic looting and repression. For the next 6 months, until liberation in late February 91, Kuwait was under brutal occupation. But occupation doesn't mean everyone submits. From almost day one, Kuwaitis began organizing resistance. It started small, neighbors helping neighbors hide from Iraqi patrols, people sharing information about Iraqi troop movements, small acts of defiance like painting anti-Saddam graffiti. But it quickly evolved into something more organized and dangerous. Multiple resistance groups formed, each with different focuses but united in their goal of making life hell for the Iraqi occupiers. One of the largest groups was the Kuwaiti National Committee. This was organized by former military officers and government officials who'd gone underground instead of fleeing. They established cells throughout Kuwait City and other towns, using pre-war government connections to coordinate activities. They had people in hospitals who could treat wounded resistance fighters. They had people in the phone company who could monitor Iraqi communications. They had safe houses where people could hide from Iraqi security forces. Another major group was the Popular Resistance Movement, which was more grassroots. This was mostly young Kuwaitis, students, workers, professionals who organized locally. They focused on direct action, sabotage, gathering intelligence, protecting Kuwaitis from arrest. These weren't professional soldiers or spies. They were regular people who learned on the job, and many of them paid for their resistance with their lives. Fatima al-Qadiri was a 24-year-old teacher when Iraq invaded. She became a courier for the resistance, smuggling messages between cells. She described the constant fear. Every time you left your house, you didn't know if you'd come back. Iraqi checkpoints everywhere. Secret police watching everyone. If they caught you with resistance materials, you'd be tortured and probably executed. But we couldn't just do nothing while they occupied our country. The resistance gathered intelligence that was invaluable to coalition forces. Kuwaitis inside occupied territory would note Iraqi troop positions, equipment types, defensive preparations. They'd sketch maps showing where Iraqi forces were concentrated. They'd identify Iraqi command posts and ammunition dumps. Then they'd smuggle this information out to Saudi Arabia, often through incredibly dangerous border crossings. Khalid al-Mudari was part of a team that ran intelligence to the border. He and others would hide documents in their vehicles, sometimes in false compartments, sometimes just mixed with other papers, hoping Iraqi soldiers wouldn't look too closely. They'd drive to areas near the Saudi border, wait until nightfall, then cross on foot through the desert, avoiding Iraqi patrols. Once in Saudi Arabia, they'd pass intelligence to Kuwaiti military officers or coalition forces, then make the dangerous trip back. The risks were extraordinary. Iraqi security forces were actively hunting resistance members. They'd arrest people on suspicion, torture them for information about other resistance members, then use that information to make more arrests. The Iraqi Mukhabarat secret police were brutal. They'd pull people out of their homes in the middle of the night. Entire families would disappear. Some were executed. Some were sent to prisons in Iraq. Some just vanished and were never seen again. One of the resistance's most important activities was protecting people from Iraqi roundups. When Iraq invaded, thousands of foreign nationals were trapped in Kuwait, Americans, British, Europeans, other Arabs. Iraq wanted to use them as human shields, placing them at strategic sites to deter coalition bombing. The resistance helped many of these people hide or escape. They'd provide false documents, hide people in safe houses, arrange transportation to the Saudi border. John Levins was a British engineer working in Kuwait when Iraq invaded. He spent 4 months hiding in Kuwait City, moved between safe houses by the resistance. He later wrote about his experience. "These Kuwaitis risked everything to protect me. They didn't know me. I was just some British guy who got stuck in their country, but they treated protecting foreigners as a duty. If Iraqi forces had found me in their house, everyone would have been arrested or killed." The resistance also conducted sabotage operations. They'd cut Iraqi communications lines. They'd plant explosives to destroy Iraqi vehicles and equipment. They'd contaminate fuel supplies. They'd set fires in buildings occupied by Iraqi forces. These weren't sophisticated military operations. Most resistance fighters had no training, but they were effective at disrupting Iraqi control and lowering Iraqi morale. Nasser al-Badr was involved in sabotage operations against Iraqi fuel depots. He and a small team would scout Iraqi military bases, identify where fuel was stored, then plant homemade incendiary devices. We made them from basic materials, nothing sophisticated. But a fuel depot is a fuel depot. It doesn't take much to start a fire that destroys thousands of gallons. The Iraqis would have to bring in more fuel, which meant more convoys that coalition aircraft could attack. Assassination was also part of the resistance strategy, though controversial. Some Kuwaitis collaborated with the Iraqi occupation, worked for Iraqi authorities, informed on their neighbors, helped Iraqi forces. The resistance viewed these collaborators as traitors and executed many of them. This created a climate of fear among potential collaborators. If you helped Iraq, the resistance might kill you. If you helped the resistance, Iraq might kill you. It was a brutal situation, with no good options for people just trying to survive. The Iraqi response to resistance activities was savage. When Iraqi forces caught resistance fighters, they'd often execute them publicly as a warning to others. There are documented cases of Kuwaitis being hanged in public squares or shot in the streets. Iraqi forces would leave bodies displayed for days to terrorize the population. They'd arrest family members of known resistance fighters, hoping to force them to turn themselves in or reveal information. Despite the risks, the resistance continued and even grew. By late 1990, estimates suggest thousands of Kuwaitis were involved in resistance activities to varying degrees. Some were full-time resistance fighters. Some were part-time, helping when they could while maintaining normal lives as cover. Some just provided small support, a safe house for one night, a tip about Iraqi movements, a little food for people in hiding. The resistance also operated outside Kuwait City. In rural areas and smaller towns, Kuwaiti families would hide in the desert, conducting guerrilla operations against Iraqi patrols. These groups were smaller and less organized than the urban resistance, but they were just as committed. They'd attack Iraqi supply convoys, ambush small Iraqi units, then disappear into the desert before reinforcements could arrive. Women played a crucial role in the resistance that often gets overlooked. Iraqi forces were less suspicious of women, so women became couriers, smugglers, safe house operators. They'd hide weapons and documents under their abayas, traditional robes, and walk right past Iraqi checkpoints. They'd organize networks to care for wounded resistance fighters. They'd gather intelligence by working in places where Iraqis wouldn't expect espionage. Asil Alawadhi was a university student who became a resistance courier. She'd carry messages hidden in her textbooks, walking between resistance cells as if she was just a student going to study groups. She later said the Iraqi soldiers at checkpoints would often wave her through without searching her. They saw a young woman with school books and didn't think I was a threat. We used that. We used every advantage we had because we were fighting an army with almost nothing. The resistance got support from outside Kuwait too. The Kuwaiti government in exile in Saudi Arabia provided some funding and coordination. Coalition Special Forces teams, American, British, made contact with resistance leaders and provided limited supplies and training. CIA and other intelligence agencies worked with the resistance to gather information about Iraqi forces, but the resistance was largely on its own, operating with minimal external support. One of the most effective intelligence operations involved monitoring Iraqi military communications. Some resistance members had radio equipment and would listen to Iraqi military frequencies, noting call signs, unit designations, movement orders. This information, when smuggled out to coalition forces, helped build a picture of Iraqi order of battle. Several successful coalition airstrikes were based on intelligence provided by the Kuwaiti resistance. As the coalition air campaign began in mid-January '91, the resistance's role evolved. They began marking targets for coalition aircraft, using lasers, fires, or other signals to identify Iraqi positions. They'd monitor bomb damage and report results. They'd help locate down coalition pilots and get them to safety. The resistance became force multipliers for the coalition, providing eyes and ears inside occupied territory. Lieutenant Commander Scott Spiker was a Navy pilot shot down on the first night of the war. There were unconfirmed reports that Kuwaiti resistance members tried to reach him before Iraqi forces did, though ultimately he was captured. Other downed pilots were more fortunate. There are documented cases of resistance members sheltering coalition aircrew and smuggling them to safety, either to the Saudi border or to areas where rescue helicopters could extract them. The resistance also documented Iraqi war crimes. When Iraqi forces tortured and executed Kuwaitis, resistance members would photograph the evidence, collect witness statements, preserve documentation. This became crucial for post-war accountability. Much of what we know about Iraqi atrocities during the occupation comes from evidence the resistance collected at great personal risk. Mohammed al-Qarafi was a doctor who treated victims of Iraqi torture. He kept detailed medical records of injuries he treated, knowing these could serve as evidence later. We saw terrible things: torture victims with burns, broken bones, wounds from beatings. Some survived. Many didn't. I documented everything because I knew someday there would have to be an accounting for what Iraq did to Kuwait. As the ground war approached in late February, the resistance became even more active and dangerous. They conducted more sabotage operations to disrupt Iraqi defenses. They attacked Iraqi supply lines. They provided real-time intelligence about Iraqi troop movements, and they prepared for the liberation they knew was coming. Resistance cells stockpiled weapons, identified key Iraqi positions to attack when coalition forces arrived, and planned how to secure important locations. When coalition ground forces crossed into Kuwait on February 24th, the resistance went into action. In Kuwait City, resistance fighters attacked Iraqi checkpoints and command posts, creating chaos behind Iraqi lines. They helped coalition forces navigate through Kuwait, pointing out where Iraqi forces were concentrated and where they could advance safely. They protected civilians from desperate Iraqi soldiers who were looting and burning buildings as they retreated. The liberation of Kuwait City on February 26th was accomplished partly by coalition forces, but also significantly by the Kuwaiti resistance rising up. Resistance fighters helped secure government buildings, protected infrastructure from Iraqi destruction, and hunted down Iraqi stragglers and collaborators. The transition from occupation to liberation happened faster and more smoothly because the resistance had maintained organization and was ready to act. But liberation also brought difficult moments. The resistance had kept lists of Kuwaiti collaborators, people who'd worked with Iraqi occupation authorities. When Iraqi forces fled, some resistance members took revenge. There are reports of summary executions of alleged collaborators, often without trials or due process. The Kuwaiti government tried to impose order, but in the chaos of liberation, some scores were settled violently. The human cost of the resistance was significant but never precisely counted. Estimates suggest several hundred Kuwaiti resistance fighters were killed during the occupation, some in combat with Iraqi forces, some executed after capture, some who simply disappeared. Hundreds more were wounded. Many were tortured. Almost everyone involved lost friends or family members. The psychological scars lasted long after liberation. Resistance families paid prices too. If Iraqi forces identified someone as a resistance member, they'd often arrest that person's entire family, parents, siblings, spouses, children, hoping to pressure the resistance fighter to surrender or to punish the family for their relatives' actions. Some families had multiple members imprisoned or killed. The occupation tore apart Kuwaiti society in ways that took years to heal. After liberation, the Kuwaiti government recognized resistance members' contributions. Medals were awarded. Memorials were built. Annual commemorations honored those who'd fought and died. But some resistance members felt their sacrifices weren't fully appreciated by the international community, which focused on coalition military operations and largely overlooked the role Kuwaitis played in their own liberation. Ahmed al-Fahad, who we mentioned at the beginning, survived the occupation and the resistance. After liberation, he helped document what the resistance had done, collecting stories and evidence. He later said the 6 months of occupation felt longer than the rest of his life. Every day was life and death. Every decision could get you or your family killed. We fought because it was our country and we couldn't just accept occupation. The coalition liberated Kuwait, but Kuwaitis never stopped fighting for it. The Kuwaiti resistance's intelligence contributions were probably their most significant military impact. The information they provided about Iraqi positions, defenses, and morale helped coalition planners tremendously. General Norman Schwarzkopf acknowledged after the war that Kuwaiti resistance intelligence was valuable, though he didn't provide specifics for security reasons. CIA and other intelligence agencies credited the resistance with providing detailed information that saved coalition lives. The resistance also had an important symbolic impact. It showed that Kuwaitis weren't passive victims waiting to be rescued. They fought back with whatever means they had. This mattered for Kuwaiti national identity and pride. After liberation, Kuwait didn't see itself as a country that had been saved by foreign forces. It saw itself as a country that had fought alongside coalition forces for its own liberation. The resistance was central to that narrative. Comparing the Kuwaiti resistance to other resistance movements in history is complicated. They weren't as large as the French resistance in World War II. They didn't have the external support that Afghan Mujahideen had fighting the Soviets. But they operated in incredibly difficult circumstances. A small country completely occupied by a vastly larger military force, with limited weapons and resources, under constant surveillance. What they accomplished was remarkable. Some lessons from the Kuwaiti resistance influenced later U.S. military thinking. The value of working with local resistance movements, the importance of human intelligence even in a high-tech war, the ways civilian populations can contribute to military operations. All of these were studied after Desert Storm. When the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, there were attempts to work with Iraqi resistance groups against Saddam, though with mixed results. For individual resistance members, the experience defined their lives. Many became prominent in post-war Kuwait, in government, business, civil society. Some struggled with trauma from what they'd experienced or witnessed. Some became advocates for human rights, having seen firsthand what occupation and repression looked like. The resistance generation shaped Kuwait's development in the decades after liberation. Today, there are museums and memorials in Kuwait dedicated to the resistance. February 26th, Liberation Day, is a national holiday that honors not just coalition forces, but also Kuwaiti resistance fighters. Schools teach about the occupation and resistance as part of Kuwaiti history. The resistance is remembered as a source of national pride, proof that Kuwaitis fought for their own freedom. If you know anyone who was part of the Kuwaiti resistance, or if you're Kuwaiti and remember the occupation, I'd love to hear those stories in the comments. This is a part of Desert Storm that deserves more recognition than it gets. The war wasn't just coalition forces liberating Kuwait. It was Kuwaitis fighting every day for 6 months to resist occupation and help win their country back. Thanks for watching Gulf War Chronicles. The Kuwaiti resistance is a reminder that even in modern high-tech war,